Los Angeles is especially exciting when it comes to the history of modern architecture and design. We built a set of life-size Lego blocks that you can connect to make any kind of layout. We recently set the record for the fastest ADU built in LA City ever. Technology has allowed humanity to grow and prosper. I think California needs to be more competitive when it comes to being pro-business. This is a place that has a lot of energy and a lot of people with energy and the desire to make change.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the California Future Society podcast. As of the time of this recording, it has now been roughly 4 months since the devastating fires swept through Los Angeles, and in those 4 months, less than 10 permits have been issued for the rebuilding effort. Now, you may know about this if you follow the guest today, Alexis Rivas, on X, where he has been posting about the challenges of what it takes to rebuild and how long it took to get a permit. Many of us recall amid the horror of the fires and in the aftermath, our leaders got on television. They talked about how they were going to be streamlining the process, accelerating the rebuild, cutting red tape so that we could rebuild quickly. But as Alexis was posting about, his experience of trying to actually get a permit was incredibly painful, incredibly slow, and reflected the broken bureaucratic system that existed before the fires took place. We talk about why permitting and building is so slow, especially in places like Los Angeles. We talk about why he chose to locate his factory in Los Angeles in the first place. And we talk about his vision for the future of the state. Can the state continue to grow? Is California full? So if you care about rebuilding in Los Angeles, if you want to see California build more homes in the future and get out of our housing crisis, or if you just want to know more about how creative people like Alexis and his team at Cover are rethinking how we build homes for the future, you're going to have a great time listening to this conversation. Make sure to subscribe, as always, wherever you're hearing this or at californiafuturesociety.com. And with that, let's go to Alexis in their factory in Gardena, California.
Well, Alexis, I'm really excited to do this.
Likewise.
How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Yeah. And so for those who don't know you, tell us about yourself and tell us about your connection to California and what brought you here to the state.
Sure. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Cover. And at Cover, we design, permit, manufacture, and install homes. We're known for ADUs, and we just started doing full-size homes as well.
Wow, that's so exciting. Yeah, and we're in one of the ADUs here.
Yes.
It's beautiful. Like you can see the attention to detail, the quality. My wife watches a lot of, HGTV home renovation shows. And so, I don't know, just you can tell that there's a lot of attention to detail all throughout the place.
Thank you. Yeah. The approach and what we're trying to do with Cover is take the kind of quality and thought that normally goes into like really high-end construction where you hire a top-tier architect, a top-tier general contractor, and make that something that's accessible to a lot more people through mass production and through, basically engineering a product and engineering a system. And so, it's how do you make better homes for everyone?
Yeah. Well, tell me about where you all are at in the trajectory of your company. I know you compared it to like the Tesla Roadster phase. It's really exciting that you're moving into homes. Tell us about the trajectory and where we currently sit in Cover's life.
Sure. So we, basically we started off with an idea and we started building homes.
Yeah.
Right? We sold, build, iterated. And a lot of the iteration was around how do you make the whole process go faster, both from a production standpoint and also from an installation standpoint on site. Because unlike a lot of other prefab where you have an entire home or maybe two parts of a home shipped on a trailer, craned into place, the way that we've approached it is panelized. So what we build in our factory are wall panels, floor panels, roof panels. Those are, made with insulation, with waterproofing, with often even electrical and plumbing already installed in the panels.
Wow.
And then those are shipped on site. But that's a much more complex problem when it comes to how do you put this together quickly and efficiently. So a lot of the time has been spent on figuring that out and developing that system. And now we have a system. We recently set the record for the fastest new ADU built in LA City ever.
Wow.
That was...
Yeah, tell us.
Yeah, that was... So that was 3.5 months from contract signing to certificate of occupancy, which might actually sound slow. Like 3.5 months doesn't sound that fast. Permits basically took just under a month, which is the fastest we've ever done. I'd love for all permits to take under a month.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that later. Yeah,
yeah, I'd love that. That's unusual. And then we did the site work. So that's foundation, some demolition, removal of trees, basically preparing the site. And then the installation of the cover itself took just about a month.
Wow.
Right. So it's actually, the construction itself was fast. And then a few weeks of paperwork back and forth to get the certificate of occupancy. Wow. Right. So if you look at a bulk of the time was actually, even on that record project, regulatory related.
Yeah. Well, and tell me, for context, you're 3.5 months, when you were first starting to build, what did that typical timeline look like? Where have you come from?
Yeah. I mean, it took, normal construction, just forget cover.
Yeah.
Right? Normal construction, you might be looking at 6 months just for a permit.
Wow.
Right. Average is actually a bit longer than that. And another year or more for the construction after the permit.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you're looking at like 18 months. So 3.5 is way faster. We were, it would have taken us 3 months early on just for the installation. If you exclude the permits, if you exclude the regulatory, it was taking us 3-4 even months to install these at first as we were developing the system. And then we got faster and faster, and we learned how to, we redesigned the panels, and it's lots of iteration.
Wow. And tell me about the long-term vision. So you started with ADUs, you're now transitioning to homes. When you're thinking 5-10 years into the future, or even beyond, what do you see as the long-term trajectory for cover?
So really what it is we've developed a system, right? And we started with ADUs because they're kind of the smallest form factor of a home.
Yeah,
right.
The atomic unit of a living unit.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, anything smaller is no longer a home; it's a shed.
Yeah,
basically. So it still has a kitchen, it still has a bathroom, it still has AC. So it has all of the complexity of a home on a smaller scale. Mm-hmm. So that's why we started with ADUs. The vision was always to go into homes, and now, where we're going with this is it's basically the same panels that are made in the production line. So we've figured out, you can kind of think of it like we've built a set of life-size Lego blocks that you can connect to make any kind of layout. So I think this is one of the big differences. People think, oh, it's made in a factory, I can only pick one of 3. With us, you don't have to. You don't have to compromise and pick, one of 5 or one of 10 or one of 3 layouts. We build with our set of Lego blocks, and as long as we're designing with those Lego blocks, we can create virtually any kind of layout. So, you can do it, we're literally in permitting for homes ranging from, ADU sized 800 square foot homes, right? Or ADUs, all the way to 4,000 square foot homes.
Wow.
Right. With, large, 4,000 square foot homes.
Yeah.
And they're made from the same Lego blocks.
Yeah.
Made on the same production line.
And will you be able to build multifamily as well, multi-story, long term?
Eventually, yeah.
Okay.
So we right now the focus is definitely on homes and ADUs.
Yeah.
And there's a big market there.
Yeah.
But eventually, this same Lego system can expand to do multifamily.
Yeah. Well, I think it's incredibly cool. And to see the trajectory, the thoughtfulness, not only in the ADU itself, but I know, having heard you speak before, the thoughtfulness into that system, into that design process that I know will just pay dividends in the future. It's all very exciting. So I want to transition. We'll come back to permitting later on, but I want to talk about not just your vision for the company, but also the way that it's tied into your vision for the state. I know this is something you talk about a lot on X and you post about, and part of what draws me to cover is that, this isn't just a vision of nice homes for some people. You talk a lot about the vision of growing the state, of expanding, of building California, not just in a literal sense of a single ADU. Where did that come from?
So I think it comes from seeing opportunity to build everywhere, right? Like when I look at a place, especially a place with weather and geography and some core attributes that are as desirable as California's, I see a lot of opportunity, and I actually see a lot of opportunity almost anywhere I travel to and see. I'm like, oh, you could build something there because I like building. Yeah. So I think that's just a natural part of me, right? But when I look at California specifically, right, I think there's a lot of talk around we're full, which to me is insane, considering how little density there is in California relative to other places in the world and in the United States.
Yeah.
And also relative to the demand. A lot of people actually want to live here. And that's reflected in home prices. So I find looking at the kind of extremes of something to be very useful in understanding what's possible.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about one of those extremes that you've put out there. You know, Matt Iglesias wrote a whole book about 1 billion Americans, right? And that was his attempt to be thought-provoking. We're not full. We could roughly triple our size. You've tweeted about, posted about now, about 1 billion Californians and how we would still have less density than the city of Paris. Tell me more about how you came to that number and what the reaction was.
Yeah, I was just, I don't remember exactly what triggered that. I was reading something, and I was like, oh, like what if, right? What if all the developed land in California was as dense as Paris? And let's just say, like, we're not getting rid of any of the national parks.
Yeah, you're not building in Yosemite. This is just previously developed land.
Yeah, which, you know, some of it's very rural and suburban, but still, it's used by humans already. Yeah, I mean, it's basically, you know, just some quick numbers because I was just curious.
Yeah,
I was just very curious, like, you know, what would that be, right? And I think and you know, a lot of people visit, you know, Paris or many other cities around the world, and they find certain aspects of them very attractive, right? The walkability, even the scale, right? Paris doesn't have that many you know, super tall buildings.
Yeah.
You know, the Haussmann era, you know, height limits that everyone has sun.
Yeah.
These are things that a lot of people, you know, look at favorably. And, you know, I'm not saying California should look like Paris, all of it, but it's useful to understand, like, we're nowhere near full.
Yeah.
Right. There's tons of room to support more people. And of course, it takes infrastructure, it takes investment, it takes better governance. There's a lot that needs to change, but the potential is there.
Yeah. Well, I find it powerful because, you know, people that have used the political slogan of like, don't Manhattan my X, don't Manhattan my Los Angeles. No one ever says, don't Paris my LA, right? Like you're saying, there's a desirability factor where no one looks at Paris and says like, oh, what an urban hellscape that seems unlivable. It's in many people's perception, like kind of the peak of urban living as far as livability and beauty and form.
Yeah, and you know, just as like another example, if you took, you know, I did the numbers on Italy as a country, the density of Italy as a country versus the United States, and I think I forget the exact number, but it was over. If the U.S. had the same population density as the country of Italy, which you don't think of as a very dense country, it would be over 1 billion people.
Wow.
Right. So it, you know, this idea that the United States is full is just, or, you know, or that the world is full, even, right? That there's too many people in the world. Yeah. It's absurd. Yeah. Right. There's, you know, technology has allowed humanity to grow and prosper. And, you know, that's not to say that we don't need to like improve how we live in order to get there. But it's you know, I'm naturally slightly optimistic.
Yeah. Well, you have to be a founder, right? You can't. We did not do this because we thought it was easy. Because it was easy. We did it because we thought it was easy, right? The famous slogan. Yeah.
Well, I didn't actually think it was easy. I thought it was going to be really important and worth doing. Yeah. Right. There's, you know, it's like how homes are. It's the single biggest product. That it impacts people's lives. Yeah. Right. For the most part. Yeah. Right? Most people, the home is the single biggest product that impacts their lives. Yeah. And yet there's been relatively little investment in that area, you know, in over a century. Yeah.
Well, we'll shift to talking about some of the policy constraints in a minute, but I find that so inspiring, the possibility that we can grow. You know, I think for many Californians of my generation, I'm a 4th generation Californian. And when I read history, when I talk to previous generations, the notion of California growing was taken for granted. It was the place of growth. And that sense of possibility was assumed. It was in the water. Right. But for our generation, so many people feel just beaten up by constraints and scarcity, and it creates this zero-sum mentality. And so even just someone putting that out there who's also building homes and stoking that sense of what's possible in the long term is really inspiring. So I really appreciate that.
Thanks.
And I want to talk about, on that note, where Cover sits within the kind of intersection of California history. There's so many different threads that you could pull on for how it relates. You know, we have this rich legacy of growing, of building homes at a large scale, of things like, you know, some of the suburbs that were first developed. We also have things like Eames, the designers who created luxury chairs that are still, wildly expensive today, but using mass production tactics in the post-war era. And we're also here in Gardena, close to, in the South Bay, hard tech, the Gundo, like you're also in the center of that too. So how do you see yourself in the context of California history? Do you just see yourself as like, I'm part of the manufacturing, El Segundo type wave of people, or how do you think of yourself?
I think part of the draw. So I grew up in Toronto, Canada. So I'm an immigrant. California. The first time I visited California, I visited a friend that worked at Apple.
Okay.
And so I immediately was kind of like immersed in that. This is the capital of innovation in the world.
Yeah. And
that Silicon Valley, right? And I found that its place in history, today, this is a very important place.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things that start in California that end up, making their way across the world, and that was exciting to me just as a place. And then I think Los Angeles is especially exciting when it comes to like you said, the history of modern architecture and design, and it has that rich history, and the case study home program.
Yeah.
And I've never liked bucketing things too much, because at the end of the day, cover is cover.
Yeah.
And it's not trying to be the X of Y.
Yeah.
But it's very much at this intersection of technology, manufacturing, design, and home building. Right. And Los Angeles is a great place to build that company.
So obviously, I'm glad you're here. I love California, and I love the fact that people like yourself are drawn to the state and envision brighter versions of the future. I think it's the most California thing possible. But I can imagine, and I'm sure you maybe face this question in your investor pitch decks and investor meetings, why build here? Why build in an area with such deep constraints when it comes to what you can and can't build in terms of cost of living, in terms of land price, and what it takes to run a manufacturing facility? Why not go to Dallas, where it's building quickly and the demand is higher? What was your thinking there?
So to start, right, the approach we had from day one was we have to start in the high end market, because there's a long history of prefabrication. We're not the first company to try to build homes in a factory.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this perception out there that homes built in a factory are inferior to homes built conventionally on site. And so from day one, we set out to change that perception and to prove to the world that this is not just faster, right, or cheaper, but actually first and foremost better. And while there's a lot of things that are very frustrating about building a company in California and building homes in California, it is probably the world's best high-end residential market.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you combine that with the talent, for the team that exists here, whether it's design or engineering or ops, right? This is a really good place to pull together the talent and to be really close to the customer.
Mm.
Now, when it comes to scaling,
yeah,
building big factories, I think there needs to be a lot of change for California to be competitive there.
Well, let's talk about that. I was talking about this with Casey Hanmer of Terraform Industries. I was asking him he has this grand ambition of these massive solar farms all across the country. And I was saying, well, inevitably you're going to have to leave California. But even if you didn't have that grand of a vision, many builders face this, we have this wacky backwards industrial policy in California where we birth the most innovative companies in the world. Yet so many of them, due to policy constraints, due to various governance challenges, feel the need to then leave if they want to grow into their ambitions. So, do you think about that in Cover's lifespan? Obviously, you're going to want to grow into other markets down the road, but are there any unique factors about California governance that you would, for your own experience, tweak in order to enable Cover to scale up to a larger size in the state?
Definitely. I think California needs to be more competitive when it comes to being pro-business, being pro-innovation, pro-moving fast. And it needs to get more competitive to, like you said, keep companies that maybe start in California, keep them scaling here.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely needs to improve.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, you had a viral Twitter. I guess it wasn't a thread. I guess it was a thread. You were posting every day your journey of trying to get a permit to build an ADU in the Palisades after the fire, after all of this PR blitz of, every leader from the city up through the president really talking about, we're going to cut red tape, we're going to streamline the process. And you were someone on the ground saying, I have a permit in the office and here's what's happening every day. And a lot of eyeballs went on that. Tell us about that and what did that reveal to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason for doing that is I was seeing a disconnect between, or I anticipated rather, a disconnect between what was being said and what was going to happen. And I wanted to build visibility on that so that it could be improved. And, permitting before the fires was slow and unnecessarily, like, there's just too many steps that don't need to be there.
Yeah.
Right. It's best to not optimize a process that should be deleted. There are many parts of that process that should be deleted.
Well, tell us what deletion would look like. I know you've talked about self-certification and others have. Right. What would that practically look like? Because I'm sure that freaks some people out in the thought of you're not going to permit a home.
Well, yeah. So I think the permit, most people have very little experience with what the permit process actually entails, right? It's not you fill out some forms, you submit the plans, and then someone reviews it. Anyway, I wish it was that simple. And even if that review took a couple of weeks, like that would be a huge improvement. In LA City specifically, and other places do this differently, you submit your plans, then it goes to your plan check engineer once that person gets assigned. And that review is actually one of the less difficult parts of the process. And that's the part where they're reviewing the building plans for safety, for compliance, all of that. And then there's something called clearances, which in LA City are handled by the different departments. So you then basically have to take that set of plans and they get put through their portal to different departments. So fire department, planning department, LADWP, the Department of Water and Power. And depending on your specific situation, it could be, 8 different departments.
Wow. And
they have their own staff, their own paperwork, their own resources, and you have to chase down and respond to comments from these multiple departments. That's actually the part of the process that takes long. Mm-hmm. Other cities do what's called a consolidated review, which is what it sounds like. It's done, by one team.
Yeah.
And that's the part that took long.
Yeah.
And so, I was, LADWP literally lost the application. We had to resubmit it.
Wow.
And the second time we submitted it, we took video. And you think that this is some kind of, really worked out process. It's like, we printed out the paperwork and we submitted it in a box in their hallway. That's the submission process. So when I hear, I'm all for advancing these processes using technology.
Yeah.
Right? I love that.
Yeah.
But when I hear that we're implementing AI to solve the problem, it's like, that's a few steps ahead from what I'm seeing on the ground, which is why don't we allow digital submissions and not lose paperwork, right?
Get it on the computer before you then get it to AI. Yeah.
Get it on a computer. And how about just also, consolidate the reviews so you don't have multiple departments. I mean, even if you have AI doing the work at 8 different departments at its own speed, it doesn't actually solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I know there's a lot of policy proposals that people have spoken about to speed up that process, or shot clocks or self-certification. We don't have to get into all of those, but I thought that was a great post. And I know you had another post where you were talking about you analyzing the data of speed of ADU approval across counties. And the range was crazy. I think it was something like 70 days in Fresno to 400 days in San Francisco. I can only imagine being a builder and dealing with that extreme uncertainty, particularly as someone who is ruthlessly optimizing speed when you have this massive factor that is outside of your control. And it feels like a wild card, I imagine, in some municipalities.
Yeah, totally. And those are averages, right? I mean, you're looking at 70-day average versus 400 and something day average.
Yeah.
So it's there's a lot of room for improvement, and Los Angeles is on the upper end of that. Right? It wasn't quite 400 days, but I'm pretty sure it was over 200 days.
Yeah. Wow. Well, so let's dream a little bit. If you got a call tomorrow, Governor Newsom says, Alexis, we're putting you are the czar of housing affordability and speed of production. So we've talked about permitting. What are some of the other reforms or policy levers that you would like to see someone pull or talk about pulling to enable the type of growth in the state and enable mass production of these homes that people would love to have?
Yeah. So I think I'd break it up into a few categories, right? You have, on the one hand, are you even allowed to build something, right? Which I'd kind of put into like the zoning side of things. Right. It's if you fill out all the paperwork and take all the pain of the process, can you even get it done? Right. And I think there is room to improve that. There's room to improve that.
Check out our episode with Nolan Gray of Cal Yimby for more in depth on the zoning stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the practical side, which is what we've been discussing on the permits. And I think that's actually a really, really big one because once someone decides to move forward, their end cost is, especially with the interest rates where they are today, a function of time.
Yeah.
Right. And so the faster you permit something, the lower the cost to whoever's building it, and assuming it's a developer, right? The lower the end price they have to sell it at to make a margin.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously, then price is dictated by the demand, right? But the more the spread between the cost and the price, the more developers that go into the market, the more homes get built, right? And then that drives prices down or at least stabilizes them.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really big area, is like cutting the time and really just removing unnecessary steps from the process, right? We had to, I'll give you one example. And I'm sure that this was a well-intentioned policy, but for that permit that you mentioned that I was posting about, we had to submit, or rather the homeowner had to submit a 4-page form, basically, more or less certifying that as part of this process, we weren't tearing down a home or a living unit that was previously affordable. It's like the whole thing burned down.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Why make thousands of homeowners who lost their home fill out this 4-page, and it's like, dense legal terms. And
not something you just sign on a whim.
It's dense, right? And for your average homeowner, we've seen this form many times before, so we were able to support and guide them through it because we knew it.
Yeah.
But it's just, we still have, that's still work.
Yeah.
Right? That's still a conversation that really shouldn't need to happen, especially in the case of a fire rebuild.
Yeah.
Right? So I think there's just, going through the process, seeing it, and really questioning, does this need, is the benefit of doing this worth the cost?
Yeah.
I'll give you another example. For, most of these builds, there's a check, a clearance from the fire department, that's around the fire safety of the unit, which is, of course, very important, right? One of the checks there is the distance from the nearest fire hydrant and the distance from the street access. So these are like reasonable things to check. This takes about 5 minutes to do, and you can pretty much do it from Google Maps. They have, of course, a lot more data at the city on where these things are, but you can basically do it from Google Maps and Street View. It takes about 5 minutes. We've had cases where projects have waited 12 weeks for that check, right? And you don't need someone with fire specific knowledge doing that. That can be, again, kind of consolidated review. So there's just looking at the, I think local leaders, local voters, local council members need to look at these things very practically.
Yeah.
And first of all, want more homes, not want to appear like there are going to be more homes, but actually want to build more homes. And then pass changes and delete process that enables that. Right. I think those are huge.
Yeah.
Those are huge.
I'm curious how you think about, not while we're on the topic of policy, do you think from Cover's perspective about or engage in any way in statewide policy debates, because I know the ability to build ADUs in part, like that's one of the silver linings of housing policy in California in recent years was these ADU streamlining laws were passed. It's enabled a lot of growth. I know large number, I forget the exact percentage of LA homes that have been approved in the last few years are ADUs that were
surprisingly high.
Yeah, it's shocking. And that was all premised on a state law that enabled that fix. And like you were saying earlier, there's other factors, but zoning and some of these approvals, these are policy decisions, and politics is messy. And this is something that in a variety of forms, every hard tech founder who's trying to do something with, actual atoms in the real world faces some type of real world policy constraint. I mean, how do you think about those policy risks? Is it something you think about, or, you got enough to keep your attention here at the factory that you don't think about it too much?
Yeah, I think as a result of what we do, I end up thinking about it probably more than I'd like to. Yeah, it ends up, it is important, right? And I really appreciate it when I do post about some of the challenges. Sometimes people in government reach out and they want to learn and they try to help, right? And I think it starts some of these conversations. And but we've got to. I think the thing that's challenging is we're really far from a working system that's going to make housing more abundant in California.
Yeah.
Right. Like
we're not a tweak away.
We're not a tweak away. There's a lot of work that needs to go into it, and there needs to be a true drive and will to make the changes needed to get the results.
Yeah.
And I think it's like the results are what matter, right? And if you look at the overall housing progress in California, the results aren't there overall.
Yeah.
Even though there have been a lot of pro-housing policies passed. And I think this is where like the nuances really matter, right? SB 9, I think, is a really good example of something that looks really good on paper, but the fact that a developer basically can't use it, right, made it almost worthless in terms of impact.
Yeah. No, I know there was a study, I think it was from YIMBY Law, or maybe it was the Turner Center. Forgive me if I'm misattributing it, but it was talking about the on-the-ground impact of a lot of these major housing reform bills, SB 9 and others. And outside of ADUs, it was the measurable impact of a lot of these laws. Now that we're several years removed and we should be seeing the impact, are woefully below what was hoped for. And I think it's important that you're talking about it. It's a broader movement issue. It's not just, we're not a policy tweak away. And I'm a policy person, so I often think in terms of policy tweaks, but I think that's a really good point that you're hitting on. And part of why there's so much energy around this conversation, because it takes a movement. And that's part of why I admire CalYIMBY so much. It's part of why I admire Grow SF. And that's part of why, in my own small way, I'm trying to like throw my body into the scrum and have some conversations around this, because we're not just one silver bullet law away. It's going to take a political movement to create the political incentives that then lead lawmakers to make the changes that are required. Because unless you change the underlying political incentives, that was my whole boss's philosophy at the old firm I was at. Political actors act in their own political interest. And until you change those political incentives, their behavior will not change.
Yeah.
Wow.
Totally.
Yeah. Sorry, that wasn't a question. That was me ranting. So
no, I agree. I think first people need to actually want more housing, right? More homes built.
Yeah.
That needs to be the first step. And I think there needs to be, a recognition of the economic realities of not building, and that's actually the core of the problem.
Yeah.
And it's not, greedy developers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or some other nefarious player, or the people buying up less than 1% of the single family housing stock. Like that is not the reason homes are expensive.
Yeah.
Right. It's really, we're just not building enough homes. And I think until there's a recognition of that, and that the solution is to build more homes, not to subsidize demand.
Yeah.
And that's broad. I think that's step one.
Yeah. Now it's funny. Anytime someone brings up the point of greedy developers, I think like, well, who built your home? It probably wasn't built by a commune.
I say greedy developers as like, of course, nobody's going to build homes to lose money.
Yeah. And your home wasn't built, unless you're in like an Amish community with a barn raising, your home wasn't built by a co-op of people who were like volunteering their Saturday to hang drywall. These are the people who build homes. If you like homes, then let's,
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know what the numbers are, but probably 99% of homes in California have been built by developers.
Yeah.
Right? It's probably 99%.
Oh, yeah. Well, one note I want to end on every conversation is just asking what brings you hope for the future of California, and what do you want to see in the next 10 to 20 years? It can be housing related. It can be, something broader. Take it whatever direction you want to take it.
I think this is a place that has a lot of energy and a lot of people with energy and the desire to make change. And it's a place where there are people who think big and make big moves. And so I think there are the ingredients to make big change. And then I think this is not necessarily a change, but it's also like it is such a fundamentally beautiful place that it is like worth saving.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who, maybe, if it wasn't quite as nice, would have left, that, want to stay and make the right changes. And that makes me optimistic, right? That makes me optimistic.
I love that. And one question I'm going to tack on, and maybe I'll splice it earlier. I forgot to ask, so you're one of the companies listed as being associated or part of the commitment to the California Forever Project, a new city up in Solano County. How did that come about? Because I think that's such a perfect fit. I love the team up there and the work that they're doing. And similarly, it evokes a sense of inspiration and possibility of what we can build in California. How'd that come about?
Yeah. We, I don't remember if they reached out or we reached out at first, but somehow we connected. And of course, it's a very exciting project.
Yeah.
I think when I look at what we do, and we started with single family homes, and then we started with ADUs, and then single family homes. They're kind of like the next step there, which is building communities.
Yeah.
And which is very exciting because the things that you can do at that kind of scale.
Yeah.
You're innovating beyond the building into kind of the fabric between different households.
Yeah.
That's really exciting, right? So I think there's a lot of alignment in terms of just how we think about homes differently, right? And the opportunity to improve standard of living and improve what a home can be.
Yeah.
They are doing the same thing at an urban scale, which is very exciting. Yeah. So I've really enjoyed my conversations with them and seeing the site and kind of going back to what we said earlier. When I see a place like that, I can see what it could be, and it's very exciting.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a wonderful conversation. I appreciate being able to speak with you.
Thank you.